PlayStation is officially done screwing around. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation, and in today's video, in addition to what I just mentioned, I have two other topics to cover. The second news story is that Phil Spencer is doing the interview rounds, and what he's talking about definitely helps Sony. And third, Sony has finally given in to gamers' demands. This is all really good news. Let's jump into this first news story because some huge shakeups are happening at PlayStation. So earlier in 2024, I think it was around June, Jim Ryan retired. He was like, I'm out, I'm done. I did the launch whole thing with the PS5. No one likes the games that I greenlit. I'm just going to take my leave here and retire. And he was replaced by two CEOs. Now, one of them was Herman Hulst, the guy who ran Guerrilla Games. He was promoted to basically run all of the game stuff within Sony as one CEO. And then the other CEO was Hideaki Nishino, and he was going to focus on hardware and everything else related to PlayStation. So like PS5 Pro, all the accessories like the Portal, the headsets, all that stuff was handled by him. Last night though, just about 6 months after this new announcement happened, we got yet another announcement that they're doing another big shakeup. And I've seen a lot of reporting that makes it seem like Herman Hulst was demoted, but he wasn't, because he's keeping his exact same job. He's going to oversee all the PlayStation studios, but Hideaki Nishino was promoted to just the regular CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and then he's going to report directly to Hiroki Totoki. So before it was Hiroki Totoki and then a double branch down to Herman Hulst and Hideaki Nishino. Now it goes Hiroki Totoki, Hideaki Nishino, and Herman Hulst. They didn't really say why this is happening, but I mean, you can read the tea leaves. The Concord situation was disastrous, having to cancel games from Bluepoint and Bend Studio that have been in the works for years at this point. That is not good either. Most of that was Herman Hulst kind of picking up the mess that Jim Ryan left for him, because while he was running a lot of the game output at Sony in the past, Jim Ryan was the CEO, and he's the one who came out and announced that they were going to start greenlighting a bunch of live service games. So like, I don't think he's completely blameless, of course, but I don't think all of the blame for the live service disaster that Sony is facing falls like solely on him. I think the vast majority of it goes to Jim Ryan because he was the CEO. He was the big boss. Regardless, he's probably under the same pressure that he was before, if not a little bit more. Like, if you're at the top, you're of course under a huge amount of pressure as the CEO of game development, because your games need to be successful, because that's what influences the share price of Sony, really. I mean, their biggest output is PlayStation. So if PlayStation's doing bad, Sony's doing bad as a whole. That's very basic stuff to figure out. But if you're underneath two people now, instead of at the top with only one person above you, obviously you're going to need to get results, or you're going to find yourself demoted, just like Shuhei Yoshida was back in the day. I didn't really agree with that at the time because he was picking good games, but if you're a business that's prioritizing game sales, you know, you got to make sure that the games are making money at the end of the day, because if they're not, the business fails and you failed at your job as a leader. Regardless of how this shakes out, because of course we still have to wait and see what happens, I think you can read the tea leaves here pretty easily and say that one side of Sony, the Hideaki Nishino side, has definitely been pulling its weight over the past generation, and the game side, I just got to be real, it hasn't. There have been quality games. I bring this up all the time. Gran Turismo 7, God of War Ragnarok, Returnal, Demon's Souls, Spider-Man 2. There have been big hit games from Sony, but the whole cross-generation thing, the focus on PC releases, all of that stuff kind of added up in the background and really put a sour taste in people's mouths. And I honestly understand why, for a lot of PlayStation fans out there who have been diehard fans since around the PlayStation 4 generation, seeing stuff like games canceled when we were told that were multiple games in development at all these studios and it turns out that they're one, I understand why that's the last straw for a lot of people. So clearly something needed to change. And I know, guys, I understand that a lot of people out there really like Horizon. And if Sony's focus on Horizon was a new game in the mainline series every 4 or 5 years, I would love Horizon 2. But treating that like the marquee IP at Sony, to the point where not only do we have Horizon 3 coming up, we also have an MMO, we have a Monster Hunter style game, we have the VR game that just came out, we have the Lego game, we have a new movie from PlayStation Productions. It is not at that level. I just can't look at Horizon and also look at franchises like God of War, Uncharted, The Last of Us, Gran Turismo, and look at those on the same level. They're just really not. I'd prefer that money and time and energy go to developing new games that could be better and actually resonate with the larger community as a whole. There is a perspective that you can look look at it that they're focusing on Horizon because it's one of their only truly family friendly sort of open world brands. I mean, you know, The Last of Us is rated M. Uncharted 4 is really pushing M with some of its violence. God of War Ragnarok is the most M-rated game Sony probably has at this point. So they clearly want to have a firmly teen-rated game that is pushing numbers so that they can get a younger audience to be allowed to play it. But I just don't see Horizon as that example. And I feel like that's a big reason why Herman Hulst was not like elevated to the CEO role over Hideaki Nishino. I think Hideaki Nishino totally earned it. I mean, the PS5 Pro, yeah, it's expensive. Yeah, it's not selling well. The expensive part is mainly down to the fact that semiconductors and all of the parts that are needed to make it are incredibly expensive still from 2020. The prices have not come down. And when you look at things like PSSR, you can point out the fact that Ubisoft games and EA games don't handle them well, but that is not on Sony. That is on lazy development over at Ubisoft and EA, something that they're ripped for constantly and rightfully so. When you look at games that use PSSR, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, that game looks better on PS5 Pro than the Ultra preset on PC. Like if you run the game on PC at Ultra settings, not only does it run worse than it does on the PS5 Pro, it looks worse as well. So at that point, you've got a $700 console going up against machines that cost $3,000 to $4,000, and it's beating them in one of the biggest and best looking open world games to release in this generation, if not ever. So on the hardware side, there are definitely things to criticize them for, and I've done it here on the channel. But if you compare the output of the hardware between the PS5, the PS5 Slim, the PS5 Pro, and the PlayStation Portal, and the Pulse Elite headset specifically because it's so good, and then you compare it to what's going on the game side, where we're getting tons of remasters like both Last of Us's, Horizon got the complete pack, we got the definitive editions of Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding. I mean, there's so many others you can point to, and then on top of that, there's cross-gen releases and everything like that. I think the hardware side is where things are going great, and I think the game side is where there's major improvement needed. So if you look at the situation here, it's very clear, obvious, and I think smart to put Hideaki Nishino above Herman Hulst. Hopefully this is a wake-up call for Herman Hulst that he needs to get his shit together, stop focusing on so many live service games, really just focus on the incredibly good ones that are worth coming out, because even if we don't play them, if one takes off, that pays for all of the games we are asking for, and that's the best future we have as PlayStation first-party gamers at the end of the day. Anyway, that brings me to the second news story here, which is that Xbox is doing well, but it's actually helping Sony. So we know this whole saga kind of wrapped up where Xbox has bought up a lot of the big publishers in the industry, people like Bethesda, people like Activision, a whole slew of other people like Obsidian, and you know, the list goes on and on. So they have a bunch of different studios making a bunch of different games under their slate, and those games are finally starting to come out. Last year, we had Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and we had Indiana Jones and The Great Circle. This year, we have a bunch of stuff coming out from them, and a lot of it is coming to PlayStation. And that's the key point here, because a lot of their games are selling well, specifically Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I know people are really down on that game now. I fell off of that in a month. It's just probably the worst multiplayer experience I've had in a first-person shooter game in a long time, and I wish I could refund that game because I did not get my money's worth out of the multiplayer. But it sold really well, and it turns out that 68% of the sales of that game were on PS5. So while yes, it did increase the overall market share of Microsoft and it made them money, most of the sales that they're getting are coming from the PlayStation ecosystem on the PlayStation 5 specifically. You know, with Microsoft going full third party, I personally don't really care because most of the games are coming to PlayStation. Like Doom the Dark Ages looks awesome. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, I'll probably play on PS5. And as I talk about a lot, we get the added benefit when they are staggered releases that, you know, all the patches come out, all the DLC comes out, all the extra content comes out in that time frame usually. And then by the time we pay for it on PlayStation, it's either discounted or the $70 purchase comes along with all of those patches and extra content. So it's like the Xbox people beta test it for us PlayStation users, and Sony still gets a 30% cut of every game sale that Microsoft makes on their platform. It's kind of smart on Microsoft's perspective, I guess, to go to where the gamers are at. But as I'll talk about in the next video, they still, once again, have very conflicting messaging when it comes to releasing their games on other platforms and releasing different hardware for people to play their games on, and why they think people would even want to buy it in the first place. The other key takeaway here is that people are buying games. I think Indiana Jones didn't do great in the sales charts, but obviously when you have a game like Call of Duty that regardless of the fact that it's on Game Pass for free, people are buying it vast majority wise on PlayStation. Indiana Jones isn't on PlayStation yet. So if they had released it day and date, I would bet that it would have sold a lot better because, you know, even though the last two movies were fucking terrible, Indiana Jones still has a lot of cachet with older people. I really like Temple of Doom. I know that's the one people hate, but people are wrong. They have a bad opinion on movies. Shocker. I'm right. It's a really good movie. I'd be interested in playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, but on PlayStation 5. I just really want to play it there, and I probably would have bought it day one in December if it was released there. So they're having good sales of their games on different platforms. People are buying games, so it just goes to show if you actually make what people are interested in, they'll show up for it, Sony. But speaking of great moves by Sony, they gave in. So there's been a big controversy over the past year where even the single player games that Sony's been putting out on PC, they require you to log into the PlayStation Network. Now you do get benefits for doing that, like being able to have trophies. So even if you're playing without a different save in Ghost of Tsushima, you get the trophies and they sync between the two platforms. You also get a cool overlay where you can message your friends and add them. And that's useful for someone like me who has a PC and a PlayStation 5. But for people whose main and only platform is PC, they're not into that idea. They don't understand why they should have to log into the PlayStation Network to play single player games like God of War Ragnarok. And despite the fact that God of War Ragnarok is a great game, they chose not to buy it just because of that login. And people were kind of wondering if Sony was going to remove that requirement, but they don't talk to us ever until they actually decide to do stuff. And it's a positive development. They've decided that it's optional now. So if you want to log into the PlayStation Network on games like The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Spider-Man 2, which comes out, I think, today when this video goes up, or God of War Ragnarok, which are all single player games, you can log in and you'll get the trophy support, you'll get the messaging, you'll get X, Y, and Z. They've also given you incentives like extra content in the game, like currency and costumes and everything like that. But if you're a PC player who does not want to log into the PlayStation Network or doesn't want to make an account in the first place, you're going to get your wish. They're taking the requirement out as of today, which will hopefully result in more sales of PC games. I mean, if they are coming out later, I don't really care. I want them to sell well because all of the extra money they make on these games gets the sequels greenlit, gets them bigger budgets, gets us as PlayStation gamers day one access that PC players don't get. I really don't see any reason to be mad anymore. And even if it's not on console, they're still paying customers and it should be the best experience possible for them. I mean, these games do have a slight discount of around $10 by the time they come out. I don't really care, honestly. I got the privilege of playing it early for paying a little bit more, and I think that's just fine. So yeah, as far as Sony goes in 2025, it's all positive developments. If you watch my video earlier in the year when I talked about things I want them to do in 2025, they are checking off a lot of the things on my list. So I am happy as a Sony fan overall. They're making money across the board, and that's just a straight up good thing. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.